like Christmas every time I watch an episode. It's so good. Hi guys! Today I'm going to be discussing the pilot episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Book 1, Water. So I'm really excited to get into it. It just blows my mind how every time I watch the series, and I've seen it about, this is going to be like my 13th or 14th time rewatching the series, how I just notice new things every single time. It's such a dense and beautiful story. I'm so excited to talk about it. Rarely does the series itself hold up its pilot episode as one of the greats, which makes sense because the showrunners, the characters, and the audience are still trying to get their footing into this new world with new ideas and new rules. But chapters 1 and 2 are basically just a two-parter pilot, and they're just so masterfully crafted. First off, I think the story really shines in the animated style that it's in. It's very detailed, it's very beautiful, and the series is like over 10 years old, and I think the animation and the artwork and the character designs, everything holds up so well because you can tell there's so much craft and so much love that goes into it. And what's great about animation and having animators be the storytellers is that they understand how important and how much legwork visual storytelling can do, and you really see that in this pilot episodes. So it starts off with the famous Katara monologue, but it's a little bit different because obviously she hasn't met Aang yet, and it goes a little bit more in depth into how the world works and the conflict that's set up at that point. There's these different nations, they're based off of their dominant element, and the Fire Nation is attacking the other nations. The only person who can put a stop to it is the Avatar. At this point, all we know is that he is the master of all 4 elements, but that he vanishes. And for the 100-year war that has taken place, the Fire Nation is almost winning. So Katara and her brother, who are the protagonists in the series, they're from the Southern Water Tribe. She talks about how her father and all the men in the tribe have gone off to war several years before, leaving the rest of their tribe behind. She also mentions how her mother has died. You get a sense of how primitive and isolated their culture is, which is a great way to bring an audience into a very high concept story like this, because we don't know much about the world that they're inhabiting either. We don't know much about bending or the Avatar, the war, and neither do they. Even though Katara is a waterbender, she doesn't really know what she's doing. Her brother refers to it as magic. They're just, Sokka and Katara, such great protagonists. You have Katara, who's super optimistic, warms up really easily to Aang when they find him. And then you have Sokka, who's a skeptic, very sarcastic, kind of a downer, but you understand where they're coming from and why they're like that, because Sokka feels like he is who can protect their tribe. So he's very wary of foreigners because he feels like he has so much responsibility on him, where Katara feels like an outsider because of her bending. So meeting someone who's really fun and who can also bend brings a connection between them. Just the opening scene and how these beautiful glacier backgrounds and their boat, which is really detailed, it just all feels very specific to where they are. You also have like their big furry coats and their like cute little gloves. It's just such a fun way to dive into a new world. They meet Aang, and Aang, all the voice actors are so good in this series. They're very distinctive. Without looking at anything, you can pick them apart. And Aang has such a great childlike voice and laugh and joy, and you can see why he is the center of the show. It's really fun to meet him because although Katara is also a bender, Aang is actually a master airbender, and it's so interesting to watch how he uses his airbending just in everyday things like sneezing or chasing after a penguin. and how it's just such an integrated part of who he is and just how he functions in the world. The animals in this series are really interesting too, and how they are just so built into the foundation of these different nations and like bending culture, and how they're usually a like mesh of different animals in our world. So Appa's a bison, but he also has like a platypus tail, and he's huge, and he has 6 legs. There's also kind of that eerie feeling throughout the episode because Aang is so naive to what's going on. He doesn't understand that there's a war, and of course there's that weird element of, we know he's the last airbender because of the name of the show. And Graham also has that ominous, we thought all airbenders were extinct, which kind of goes over his head, and he doesn't really deal with that episode. But there's that sense of like, oh no, what is Aang woken up to? In the war itself, when they're in that Fire Nation warship, and Katara explains, you've been in that ice bubble not just for a few days, but it sounds like 100 years, and there's been a major war against the Fire Nation. And he's just kind of taken aback and takes a hit from that. Speaking of Fire Nation, this is when we're also introduced to Zuko, who's set up in these first few episodes as the main antagonist. He's not given too many scenes, you gain a lot of information from it. You know that he's a prince of the Fire Nation, that he needs to capture the Avatar. He needs to because his honor depends on it. He's very hot-headed, emphasis on the hot. Has quick temper, seems to be a really good bender, but there's that training scene where his uncle is telling him that the power doesn't come from your muscles, the power comes from the breath. And he just snaps at him, he just wants to go on to the next thing. He thinks he's too good for all that basic stuff, and you really get a sense of his spoiled, entitled, but also dark and kind of heavy personality right away. And then of course the interesting fact that there's a scar on one side of his face. He's a very eerie element in the story. There's that interesting scene, it's very short, between Sokka and Zuko. They're both getting ready for an impending battle between them because Aang accidentally set off that flare in the Fire Navy ship, and so Zuko knows where to go to try to find him. Sokka's in a tent alone, putting on what you can assume is a traditional Southern Water Tribe war paint, and Zuko's in a ship having his people put on all this heavy-duty armor, and it's just such a instant way to know Zuko is of much higher status. Zuko has people who will just do things for him. He can afford armor, where Sokka doesn't have any of that, but what he does have is a tie to his people and a tie to his culture and a ritual that makes him feel like he's getting ready for a battle. And it is that confrontation with Zuko when Zuko lands, which is also such great animation because you get an incredible use of scale where Sokka is on that snow wall and the ship just takes up the entire screen as it's coming in, and you just get the sense of the Southern Water Tribe would not stand a chance, is so underprepared, and the Fire Nation and Zuko are just on another level when it comes to technology. Zuko comes down, and Sokka, even though he's kind of been a bit of a butthead to Katara and to Aang, who he's banished at this point for setting off the booby trap in the first place, he attacks Zuko right away, and Zuko just kind of boop, kicks him out of the way. And Sokka still comes back again and again and again. He does not give up. He gives everything he's got at Zuko, even though Zuko keeps getting the upper hand on him. And this is also when you first see the fire daggers that Zuko has, which is great. That's part of the joy of the show, is seeing the different ways that bending is used and how bending also gives you a bit of the character's personality, which you definitely see later on with Aang, who at this point knows something is up, comes in and saves the day, and is willing to go with Zuko. This is also another great, just little character development from Sokka, just right away. He's very stubborn, but the second that he sees Aang is willing to turn himself in for his people and his tribe, Sokka's like, okay, we gotta go save him. Like, Katara goes on this whole rambling speech thinking that she really has to convince Sokka that they need to go save him, and he's just like, okay, I got the boat ready, let's go. Sokka's a pain, but he has such a good heart, and that's a reoccurring theme throughout the series. He's stubborn, but he's willing to admit when he's wrong, and he's always willing to try. When we get on the ship, and it's just such a beautiful and interesting contrast between the Fire Nation ship and then where we've been down in the South Pole with all the blue and the ice, more simple architecture. We get in there's lots of metal and parts, and just looks really advanced, and that red glow throughout, where it just feels like these are such distinctive cultures, even just between a tiny little tribe and Zuko's boat. Zuko also says this really interesting thing about his father. And he says, well, you wouldn't understand that being raised by monks. Like, oh, there is all these cultural differences. This is where the first like real bending fight happens, and where you get to see how bending is used to portray personality. Aang has his hands behind his back, he has a guard behind him and in front of him, and he just like blows a big gust of wind, and like the one in front of him gets pushed against the wall, the one behind him gets pushed back. You see him go down another hallway and just run on the wall and the ceiling and kind of loops around all these other guards. And it's kind of playful, which is part of Aang's personality, but he's also not someone who's trying to attack them. Even when he goes into Zuko's room and there's that confrontation, Zuko's bending all this fire at him throughout the room, and Aang really tries to avoid him. He's hiding behind his back, he's hiding from the fire, just trying to get his staff, and it really is until the very end that he kind of like shoves Zuko against the wall, kind of more trying to stun him than really hurt him, because he's just trying to escape. He just needs time to try to escape. At the end of that episode, you see him go into the Avatar state. You see it once earlier in like a flashback dream when he gets in that ice bubble. You see it again when he gets thrown overboard. That's when he gets more on the attack, and he bends himself 100 feet in the air with the water, and he throws all these people, including Zuko, overboard. When he's done, he's exhausted. He doesn't know how he can do it, how he can tap into this Avatar state, or that he even really knows what he's doing when he's tapped into it, because you can feel how that bending style is just so different, because just a little bit earlier, he was more on the offense and just trying to avoid and evade. The gang with Sokka and Katara and Appa and Aang are all able to go away, and this is where you get really like, here's the plot for pretty much the rest of the series, which is Aang resents being the Avatar and feels overwhelmed with what to do and how he could possibly put a stop to the war. And Katara goes, well, legend is you need to master water bending, then earth bending, then fire bending. He's already mastered airbending, so he needs to do waterbending. Katara wants to learn about waterbending, and Sokka now feels like he has a proactive role in ending the war, so he's happy with going on this journey with them. Now we kind of set up that Zuko, for some reason, is going to be following them because he needs to capture the Avatar. Just such an excellent setup into the series. You get so many beautiful elements. Just the way they're dressed, there's so much detail in it. It feels very lived in. You can feel the history behind it. That only grows as the series goes on. I also love the animation is just so incredible. Like when they're outside, their hair will blow in the wind. Or when they are in the glacier, their voices will echo. There's just so many details to make it feel as real as possible. That's the first episodes. So excited about the third episode because that's where I've always felt this series like, boom, that's when it really starts. I'm excited to explore and discuss things further with you guys. Please leave comments below if you have any thoughts or added comments to the review as well. I'd love to hear them. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!